How far would you go for love? Or better yet, what would you do for the love of your life? Some of us are inclined to say that we would do anything for love, that we would run right into hell and back. But let's be realistic. How far would you really go? I mean, there are some boundaries I wouldn't be able to cross. For example, no means no to me. I won't be too pushy or too forceful. If it's done, it's done. Oh yeah, and I wouldn't vandalize her body by sleeping with her remains for several years in the mausoleum and then drag her back to my house when that wasn't enough. Yep, I wouldn't cross that line. But our man Carl here would. Because you see, if you're a hopeless romantic, then the idea of death doesn't always mean that it's done, you know. But first things first, let's talk about Carl. Carl Tanzler, born in Dresden, Germany in 1877, lived a relatively quiet and normal life prior to World War I. In fact, just before World War I, he ended up in Australia, and subsequent imprisonment, or rather internment. As you might have guessed, he didn't quite like this, so he planned to escape in a makeshift sailboat. He did manage to get back to Germany after the war, around 1920, where he married his wife Doris Schäfer, with whom he had 2 children, 2 daughters. But as Carl was a worldly man, Germany didn't keep them long. Soon they moved to Cuba and from there to Florida. Having settled his family in Zephyrhills, Florida, he moved to Key West to work as a radiology technician in the U.S Marine Hospital, with different name of course. Now he was Carl von Cosel. Now in April 1930, as fate would have it, things were about to turn strange for Carl. Over there he met a young woman by the name of Maria Elena Milagro de Hoyos, who had come here on a regular examination. Quite smitten by the young lady's beauty, he suddenly recalled a vision he had as a child. Oh yeah, did I forget to mention that? Funny thing, really. As a kid he claims to have been visited by one of his ancestors, Countess Anna Constantina von Cosel. And it was her, in fact, who revealed him the face of his true love, not the boring wife he had back at home with kids. No, of course not. His true love was apparently an exotic dark-haired woman. And De Hoyos, being Cuban-American, was exactly that to our German enthusiast. Now, as thrilled as he was to meet her, sadness soon overcame him. Unfortunately, young Elena had tuberculosis, and at that time that was still an incurable and deadly disease. Carl personally offered to treat Elena with a variety of medications, including even X-ray. He was infatuated with her, often giving her gifts and professing his love while treating her at the same time. Even though it was documented that he did profess his love as often as possible, young Elena was in fact married to another man during that time. It's worth noting that he did leave her after some time and moved to Miami, but technically she was still married to him. There was no evidence of Elena showing any affection towards Carl besides cordial behavior. Despite his best efforts and strange methods, Elena did eventually die on the 25th of October in 1931. Heartbroken and depressed, he proposed to cover all funeral expenses and built a mausoleum for his beloved Elena. Now, if you're familiar with my other videos, I'm sure you can guess that something's about to go wild right about this moment, right? I mean, it sure feels like something crazy is going to happen, right? Well, of course it fucking is. Carl was the only one with the key to mausoleum, and soon his mind went onto a dark and twisted path. He would visit her for the next 2 years almost every night, sneaking inside the mausoleum and, well, cuddling with her. Later he even said that her spirit would appear often when he was sitting near her, serenading her favorite Spanish songs. She would in fact often tell him to take her out of the grave. Not that it was his idea, naturally. He would never do that. But he respected her so much that he had to do it. For her, of course. So what he did was, one night he snuck into a cemetery with a miniature wagon all the way to her mausoleum, where he took her body, placed it on a said wagon, and drove her all the way to his place. He covered her with robes, of course. Now that they were so close to each other, their love could only bloom, is what Carl thought. But unfortunately, upkeep on a corpse already decomposing for 2 years is no easy task. He had to use a plaster that hardens fast, as well as a glass eyes to keep her face, well, in one place. For the rest of the body he had to be a bit more creative, so he used coat hangers and piano wires to stabilize her body. In order to keep her original shape, he used cloths and rags to fill her abdomen and stomach area. On her head he put a wig, with her natural hair, of course, to keep it original. Once all her bodily modifications were done, he put her in a fashionable dress, stockings, gloves, etc., as well as some jewelry. And now that everything was fine and proper, he of course made her rest in his bed. Needless to say, he had to use a shit ton of perfume, sanitizer and preserving agents to mask the smell and stall the decomposition further. Now, how long do you think this lasted? You'd think a month or two before it would be too much of a hassle, right? Before the body would be way past simple decomposition, right? But you'd be wrong. Very wrong. Carl managed to pull this for 7 long years. Love truly makes us do weird and strange things. Don't you think so? Now, the reason why it was doomed to fail sooner or later was because there were rumors that Carl was often seen buying women's clothes, and he was often seen dancing with a life-size doll by his window. Elena's sister promptly came to him, confronted him about these rumors, called the authorities, and he was promptly arrested and jailed. Now, having passed psychiatric examination, he was deemed sane enough to stand trial for desecrating graves and removing bodies. But funny thing is, charges were soon dropped because the statute of limitation for such crime have been expired. Now, allegedly, he had a grandiose idea of sending her body to the stratosphere on an airplane, where she would be bombarded with radiation, which would in turn restore her life or to her flesh somehow. I don't know. Now, this case garnered a sizable amount of media attention, and the general public's opinion on the case was quite divided. Now, some saw him as a hopeless romantic who would do anything for his love, a misguided soul who couldn't deal with grief. Others were not so kind. They saw him as a simple macabre sadist who would do anything to desecrate human bodies. Now, it should be noted that in 1972 there was a research that noted some evidence which would lead us to believe that Carl was into necrophilia. Apparently, 2 physicians who examined body back in 1940s suddenly remembered now in 1972 that there was a vaginal tube inserted into Elena's vaginal area in order to have a sexual intercourse. These claims were dismissed and considered questionable at best. Now, even more macabre than that was the fact that Elena's body was shortly put on a display in a funeral home for all to see. Now, shortly after that, she was buried in an unmarked grave in order to prevent any possible further desecration of the body. And what did our good doctor do after the trial was over and everything was done now? He moved near Zephyrhills in Florida, near his wife, where she even helped him during his later years in life. He even wrote an autobiography during this time. Even though he was far from Elena, she was always in his heart and in his mind. But the physical connection was missing, and he had to do something about that. Now you're probably getting another rush of creepy vibes, I bet. But no worries, there was no grave robbing, no more corpses mending going on. It was all in the past now. Now what he did was he used a so-called death mask to create a life-sized effigy of Elena. And in fact, that Elena was his partner until the day he died in 1952 at the age of 75. There are some strange stories surrounding his death even. Some say that he was found with said effigy in his arms laying on the floor, even though his obituary states no such thing. Many years after both of their deaths, some insinuations are still ongoing. The most recent one was that he, in fact, willingly poisoned her so that she would no longer suffer. Which makes no sense in my opinion, since he tried his darnest to keep her alive, but whatever. Now back onto my original question. How far would you go for the love of your life, and what would you do? Many of you, at least I would hope so, would not do what Carl did. But can you truly blame him? I mean, we can point our fingers all we want or say whatever we want to say, but the man did prove that in some cases love truly never dies. He was head over heels for Elena, and somewhere down the line he lost his damn head. I can't even imagine what kind of grief and pain would make you do such a thing. That's way beyond me. Anyway, that's it for today's video. Hopefully you can take something positive from this, like what boundaries not to cross or how to keep a decomposed body for as long as possible. Either is fine. That's it for me. If it's not too much to ask, please subscribe and like the video. It means a lot. Hopefully I'll see you in the next one. See ya.